Hello, I'm Kirsty Young, and this is a podcast from the Desert Island Discs archive. For rights reasons, we've had to shorten the music. The programme was originally broadcast in 1986, and the presenter was Michael Parkinson.
Now, Castaway is generally acknowledged as Britain's best post-war novelist. It's 32 years since he published his first novel, Lucky Jim. His 16th has just won him the Booker Prize. It's called The Old Devils, and it prompted the novelist and critic Anthony Burgess to state, "There's one old devil who's writing better than he ever did." He's referring to Kingsley Amis. Kingsley, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Well done. Reading about you, I got this feeling that you're not going to enjoy this desert island. You don't like loneliness, do you?
No, I wasn't made to flourish or even survive very much on my own. And it's partly company and partly, I don't know, something more basic, whatever that may be.
What about looking after yourself? I mean, you're a practical man in any sense.
No, it's hopeless. I can just about scramble an egg, given a cookery book and plenty of time.
Well, how much consolation then would music be on this island? How much has, in fact, it been in your life?
Well, it's always been a great thing for me. And as I grow older, I find it doesn't dim at all. In fact, it becomes more important, and I think I see more in what I thought I knew quite well years ago.
Let's then have a first choice of music.
Yes, well, this is a good example of that. It's a waltz by Johann Strauss, Tales from the Vienna Woods, and that's the sort of thing one hears practically in one's cradle. Usually badly performed, often by an under-strength orchestra, and one forgets how marvellous it can be properly done.
That was Tales from the Vienna Woods, played by the Johann Strauss Orchestra of Vienna, conducted by Willy Boskovsky.
Just before we leave that, I was interested just the other day to hear that Brahms was a great admirer of Johann Strauss and said, rather ruefully, he always delivers, doesn't he? Unlike some people I could mention. So I'm in good company there.
Sure, indeed. Let's go right back to the beginning. Tell me about your background, about your parents. What sort of a background do you have?
Well, it was a sort of respectable lower middle class background, I suppose you'd call it now. And in those days, in the early and middle 20s, of course, even people in quite humble stations like my parents kept servants, or a servant. And there was a Welsh maid, I remember, for the first 2 or 3 years or so. When the Depression struck, I mean, I remember that. My father never lost his job, but, plenty of people he knew were doing so and had done so. And there was a good deal of a sort of tension that I don't think I understood, of course, at the time, going on in the air. And then, my father had been to a school that he highly admired and greatly enjoyed, the City of London School, and he wanted me very much to go there.
What kind of ambition did he have for you? What did he want?
Well, really, I think he understand. I don't say this in a spirit of rancour, but like many fathers, he wanted his son to be a more successful replica of himself, and I think he had in mind for me something unbelievably prosperous, like a house on the Purley bypass with a Ford V8 or something of that sort, and a very respectable setup. Well, it became clear quite early that things weren't going to go quite that way.
In what way did the things become clear? I mean,
well, I wasn't. Another thing he wanted me to do was to be a sportsman, a cricketer. He was a very good club cricketer himself, and right on into his 60s, I think. It boiled down to me having my head in a book, all this poetry when I could have been out in the fresh air.
Were the books at home then, or all these books you went out and got from or bought yourself?
There was an excellent public library in easy walking distance. Of course, the big revolution came when I suppose I was 14, when Penguin Books appeared. And for the price of a ham roll, you could get a whole novel.
And who were the early influences then, Kingsley? Who were the people you remember reading at that time?
Well, let's see, always greatly enjoyed P.G. Wodehouse. And again, one of those things that improve with age. Quite early on, I suppose, I heard about this man, Evelyn Waugh, who people thought rightly was very funny, but there again, I couldn't see till later that he's much more than that.
You were an only child, weren't you?
Yes.
Were you, in a sense, overprotected by your parents in this period?
Yes, I think I was. And one can understand it from their social position at the time, the fear of, as it were, tumbling into the working class. So kids with worse accents than ours were very much kept at arm's length. And so, in more than one way, I had to make my own way in the world.
Let's have a second choice of record.
Early on, again, I'd heard some of the more popular works of Mozart. And I, without ever having seen the opera, The Magic Flute, I remember when I was at school in 1940, evacuated to Wiltshire, saving up enough to buy the second half of the second act of The Magic Flute. And I'll never forget the experience of hearing this.
The Magic Flute, conducted by Sir Thomas Beecham. You mentioned, Kingsley, that you first heard that at school. In fact, you went to school in London, then in Marlborough, didn't you?
Yes.
You moved there, evacuated there, were you?
Yes, in 1939, yes.
And what about university? You were always destined to go there, were you?
Well, I was. I landed myself a scholarship in English at St John's, Oxford, and Julie went up there. The war was on and people were turning up at any time rather than just in the autumn, as it used to be. So up there I went in April 41.
I read a curious story that on the very same day you met Philip Larkin, who was a great influence in your life and a great friend of yours, and also joined the Communist Party on the same day. Is that right?
Well, it would be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, it makes a better story.
It's a wonderful story.
It turned out quite fit it all in. It's not impossible, because at any rate, one can say that both things happened in the first week.
They did.
When I was there, yeah.
Well, let's take them in chronological order then. I mean, you met Larkin first, did you?
Yes, I did, just about.
What was the sort of first impression? Because he did have an effect on your later life, didn't he?
Yes. Well, the first impression he made was very different from what I later learnt about him. He was almost a caricature of a hearty, beer-drinking, swearing undergraduate. Except he didn't play any games, of course. And I only realised by degrees that he wrote poetry, but that didn't strike me as very unusual. You know, everybody wrote poetry at that age and in those days. And then I began to notice that the poetry was quite unexpected to go with this hearty exterior. And over the years, it soon emerged that I think the heartiness was a kind of protective shell in a way.
Yes.
As though he was always, right until he fell ill, he was always the best possible, warm, amusing company.
And you, of course, shared, apart from your love of poetry, your love of jazz too.
Yes, which we discussed much more passionately than poetry, as you can imagine.
At this time in your life, were you wanting to be a poet? Was that the ambition?
Yes, we had it shared out. I was going to be the poet and he was going to be the novelist. Funny that, in the view of the way things turned out later.
Let's take the second event of that week as well, joining the Communist Party. What circumstance did you do that?
Well, it was a way of defying my parents and my background, wasn't it? And it gave me one or two useful bits of information or insight into how the party worked, how, not only was the entire committee of the Labour Club, which was avowedly Marxist-directed, entirely run by members of the Communist Party, but also the Liberal Club and the Conservative Association. I think we missed one time. We lost a Conservative seat to a Conservative, if you see what I mean. Closed membership, it was called. I was an open one, because they obviously weren't going to entrust me with any difficult or confidential tasks.